The bridge of the Kalrathi ship was filling with smoke and the lights kept flickering on and off like dying stars. Ambassador Velrin held onto his chair as another explosion shook the entire vessel and made the floor tilt under his feet. His hands were shaking, but he tried to stay calm because everyone was looking at him for orders, and he was their leader, and leaders had to be strong even when they were terrified inside. The ship was called Gentle Current, and it was a diplomatic vessel, which meant it had almost no weapons at all because the Kalrathi people believed in peace and talking instead of fighting. They had spent hundreds of years traveling between the stars and making friends with other species and building trade routes and helping people understand each other better. Their ships were made for carrying ambassadors and families and scholars and artists. They were not made for war. But the Zethric raiders did not care about any of that. Velrin looked at his aide Mora, who was working frantically at her station with her 3 fingers moving across the controls so fast they were almost blurring. She was young, and this was supposed to be a simple diplomatic mission to deliver some trade agreements to a nearby station, but now they were all going to die unless something changed very quickly. The Zethric had 7 ships surrounding them, like hungry wolves around a wounded animal. They kept firing at the Gentle Current and draining the shields bit by bit, and it was only a matter of time before the shields failed completely, and then the raiders would board the ship and take everyone prisoner, or worse. Velrin had heard stories about what the Zethric did to their captives, and he did not want to think about those stories right now because thinking about them would make him freeze up, and he needed to keep moving and keep trying to save his people. There were 247 Kalrathi on this ship, including children and elderly, and none of them deserved to die like this in the cold darkness of space so far from home. Velrin pressed the button on his console and spoke into the microphone with as much authority as he could manage, even though his voice wanted to shake and break. He told Mora to send out a distress signal on every frequency they had, and to include their exact location and what was happening to them. Maybe someone would hear it, even though they were 3 days away from the nearest Galactic Council patrol route, and 3 days was an eternity when you only had minutes left to live. Mora worked her controls and sent the signal out into the vast emptiness of space, like throwing a bottle into an ocean and hoping someone somewhere would find it before it was too late. She looked up at Velrin with her large, dark eyes and told him the signal was sent, but that there was almost no chance anyone would reach them in time. The shields dropped to 8%, and another explosion rocked the ship, and somewhere in the lower decks, someone screamed, and Velrin closed his eyes and tried to accept that this was how his story would end. But then Mora made a sound that was half gasp and half sob, and Velrin opened his eyes and looked at her and asked what was wrong. She stared at her screen like she could not believe what she was seeing, and she told him they had received a response already. Velrin felt his heart jump in his chest, and he asked her who had responded so quickly because that should have been impossible. Mora's skin turned pale and ashen, which was what happened to Kalrathi when they were deeply frightened. She looked at Velrin and told him the signal was from humans, from something called the Terran Defense Fleet. They said they were 12 hours away and they were coming to help. The bridge went completely silent, except for the sound of failing systems beeping and sparking. Everyone knew about humans, even though they had only been traveling in space for less than 100 years. Every species in the galaxy knew about them because they came from a planet that was classified as a Class 12 death world. A death world was a planet so hostile and dangerous that most scientists thought intelligent life should never have evolved there at all. But somehow humans had not only survived on their nightmare planet, but had thrived and built cities and eventually reached the stars. They were stronger than almost any other species, and they healed from injuries that would kill other beings, and they could eat things that were poisonous to everyone else. The Galactic Council watched humans very carefully because they were powerful and aggressive, and they built warships instead of peaceful trading vessels. Most species gave human ships a wide path when they saw them coming because nobody wanted trouble with Deathworlders. Velrin sat very still and thought about what this meant. The Zethric would destroy them in the next few minutes unless help came, but the help that was coming was from humans who might be just as dangerous as the raiders. But what choice did they have now? It was accept help from the Deathworlders, or die right here, and at least with the humans, there was a chance some of them might survive. He told Mora to send a response and accept their offer of assistance. Mora sent the message, and then looked at her screen again, and told Velrin there was one more line in the human transmission. Velrin asked what it said, and Mora read it out loud slowly. It said hold on, because the cavalry was coming. Velrin did not know what the word cavalry meant, because it was a human word that did not translate well into Kalrathi language. But he understood the feeling behind it. Someone was coming to save them. Someone had heard their cry for help in the darkness, and was racing toward them as fast as they could. For the first time since the attack started, Velrin felt something other than fear and despair. He felt hope rising in his chest like a small, warm light. He stood up straighter and looked around at his crew, and told them to keep the ship together for just a few more hours. He told them help was coming, and they just needed to hold on. The Zethrik kept attacking and the shields kept dropping, but somehow, the gentle current stayed in one piece. The engineering teams worked miracles, keeping the dying systems running, and the medical teams helped the injured. And everyone waited and hoped and prayed to whatever gods they believed in, that the humans would arrive in time. Velrin watched the countdown timer on his screen and wondered what would happen when the human warships arrived. Would they save the Kalrathi, or would this turn into an even worse nightmare? He did not know, but he would find out soon enough. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his warship and stared at the tactical display showing the Kalrathi vessel surrounded by enemy ships. The display was a holographic image that floated in the air and showed everything in bright blue and red colors. The Kalrathi ship looked like it was barely holding together, and the 7 Zethrik raider ships were circling it slowly like they were playing with their prey before moving in for the kill. Jake was a tall man with short, dark hair and calm eyes that had seen too many battles. He had been in the Terran Defense Fleet for 15 years, and he had responded to dozens of distress calls, but he never got used to seeing innocent people in danger. Every time it made him angry, and every time it made him more determined to stop the ones doing the hurting. His ship was called the Vengeance, and it was not pretty or elegant like the ships other species built. It was a brutal, angular thing covered in thick armor plating and bristling with weapons of every kind. It looked exactly like what it was meant to be, which was an instrument of war built by a species that had spent thousands of years learning how to destroy each other before finally deciding to work together instead. Lieutenant Amy Rogers sat at the communications station running checks on all the systems. She was young and smart, and she had been with Jake for 3 years now. She looked up from her console and told him they were 5 minutes away from the battle zone. She said the Kalrathi ship was still holding together but barely, and that life support was failing, and the Zethrik were just toying with them now. Jake nodded and asked about the status of their fleet. Amy told him all 5 human warships were in formation and ready for combat. The other ships were called Defiant and Ironclad and Thunderstrike and Reaper, and they were all waiting for his orders. Jake looked at the display again and calculated the odds in his head. 5 human ships against 7 raiders. The Zethrik had more ships, but they had no idea what they were about to face. Human warships were not like other vessels in the galaxy. They were faster and tougher, and carried weapons that could tear through shields and armor like paper. They were built by engineers who had designed tanks and fighter jets and battleships back on Earth, and those engineers had brought all that knowledge with them to the stars. Jake told Amy to open a communication channel to the Zethrik vessels. Amy worked her controls, and then nodded to let him know the channel was open, and they could hear him. Jake leaned forward slightly and spoke in a calm, clear voice. He identified himself as Commander Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet, and told the raiders they were attacking a vessel under human protection. He told them to power down their weapons and retreat immediately, or he would consider them hostile combatants and respond with lethal force. The response came back quickly in broken Galactic Common, which was the language most species used to talk to each other. The Zethrik commander's voice was full of contempt and mockery. He told the humans to go back to their death world and said this did not concern them. He said the Kalrathi were his prey, and not theirs. Jake smiled, but there was no warmth in it and no humor. It was the smile of a predator who had just been given permission to do what he did best. He cut the communication channel and turned to Amy. He told her to signal the fleet and put them in battle formation Delta. He said to target the enemy weapons and engines first, because he wanted them disabled, not destroyed. He said they were not murderers. Amy looked at her screen and told him the Zethrik were powering up their weapons. She said 3 of the raider ships were breaking away from the Kalrathi vessel and moving to engage the human fleet. Jake gave the order he had been waiting to give. He told all ships that weapons were free and to engage the enemy. The bridge lights dimmed, as power was redirected from non-essential systems to weapons and shields. Through the main view screen, Jake watched as the 5 human warships burst forward at speeds that would have torn apart most civilian vessels. The Zethric raiders seemed confused by the aggressive response, because they were used to prey that ran away or begged for mercy. That moment of hesitation cost them everything. The Vengeance opened fire with its railguns, which were weapons that used magnetic force to shoot metal slugs at hypersonic speeds. The slugs tore through the lead raiders' shields, like they were not even there, and explosions blossomed across the enemy ship's hull as weapons systems and engines were systematically destroyed. The other human ships followed the same pattern with their fire coordinated and precise and devastating. Within 90 seconds, 4 Zethric ships were crippled and drifting in space with no power and no weapons. The remaining 3 raiders tried to run, but human ships were faster because their engines were designed by a species that believed the best defense was overwhelming offense. Jake watched the battle unfold with professional detachment. He felt no joy in the destruction, but he felt satisfaction in protecting the innocent. This was what humans did now. They had spent so long fighting each other back on Earth, and now they used all that knowledge and experience to fight for others instead. Amy told him they were receiving a transmission from the Kalrathi vessel. Jake told her to put it through, and Ambassador Velrin's alien face appeared on the screen. The ambassador looked shocked and confused, and his features were contorted in an expression Jake had learned meant disbelief. Velrin started to speak, but his words came out jumbled and confused. He said something about the human ships and how fast it had been, and he seemed unable to form complete sentences. Jake spoke gently and told the ambassador he was safe now. He said they were sending over engineering teams to help stabilize the Kalrathi ship, and that medical teams were standing by if there were wounded. Velrin seemed to struggle to understand what was happening. He asked how the humans had destroyed an entire fleet in less than 2 minutes. Jake corrected him and said they had not destroyed the fleet, but disabled it. He said there was a difference. He explained that once they made sure the Kalrathi were safe, they would tow the raiders to the nearest council station for prosecution. The ambassador looked at Jake like he was seeing something he had never expected to see. He said the galaxy did not know what humans were truly capable of, and it was phrased like a question and a statement at the same time. Jake shrugged and said they preferred it that way. He said it helped keep the peace when people underestimated them. Then he changed the subject and said they should focus on getting the Kalrathi and their people somewhere safe. The medical bay of the Vengeance was busy with activity, but it was the controlled kind of busy where everyone knew exactly what they were doing and moved with purpose and efficiency. Dr. Lisa Bennett walked between the beds where Kalrathi patients lay, recovering from their injuries and from the terror of the attack. Her medical team worked alongside her, and they all moved quietly and carefully because they could see how frightened the aliens were. The Kalrathi had never been this close to humans before, and everything they had heard about Deathworlders made them afraid. Lisa could see it in their eyes, and in the way they flinched whenever someone came near them. It made her sad because she was here to help them, but they looked at her like she might hurt them instead. Lisa was a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and gentle hands. She had become a doctor because she wanted to heal people, and it did not matter to her if those people were human or alien. Pain was pain, and fear was fear, and her job was to take both away if she could. She approached a young Kalrathi child who was sitting on a bed next to her mother. The child looked up at Lisa and immediately pressed herself against her mother and tried to make herself smaller. Lisa stopped walking and crouched down slowly to make herself less intimidating. She held up a medical scanner, which was a small device that could check someone's health without touching them. Lisa spoke softly and told the child she just wanted to check her vitals. She said it would not hurt, and she promised. The child's mother pulled her daughter closer, and her skin was still pale with fear. The mother asked Lisa what they were going to do with them, and her voice shook when she spoke. Lisa was genuinely confused by the question. She asked what the mother meant, and said they were just going to make sure everyone was healthy, and then help them get to the nearest Kalrathi station. She asked what the mother thought they were going to do. The mother spoke quietly and said they had heard stories about Deathworlders, about humans. She said the stories claimed humans were violent and aggressive, and that they took what they wanted by force. She said everyone in the galaxy was afraid of them. Lisa sat down on the floor cross-legged, which made her even smaller and less threatening. She thought about what to say and decided the truth was always best. She told the mother she would not lie. She said humans could be violent when they needed to be. She said the mother had seen what their ships did to the raiders. But she said, violence and cruelty were not the same thing. She said humans did not hurt people who had not hurt anyone else. And they definitely did not hurt children. Lisa held out the scanner again and moved very slowly like she was approaching a scared animal. She asked if she could check the child's health. The mother looked at Lisa for a long moment and then nodded slowly. Lisa quickly ran the scan and then smiled. She told them the child was fine and just scared, which was completely normal. She said they were both going to be okay. On the other side of the medical bay, Ambassador Velrin was talking with Commander Jake Morrison. The ambassador had been given something to calm his nerves, but he was still clearly upset and confused by everything that had happened. He sat on the edge of a medical bed, and Jake leaned against the wall nearby with his arms crossed in a relaxed posture. Velrin looked at Jake and said he did not understand humans. He said they had the power to take whatever they wanted. Their ships and weapons were centuries ahead of anything the raiders had, and probably ahead of most council species too. He asked why humans helped instead of conquered. Jake was quiet for a moment, and then he pushed away from the wall and walked to the viewport, where he could see the stars outside. He said humans had seen what conquest looked like. For thousands of years they conquered each other. They had wars that killed millions of people, and weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. They almost wiped themselves out half a dozen times before they finally learned to work together. Jake turned back to look at Velrin, and his expression was serious. He said, when humans finally made it to space and discovered they were not alone, they had a choice to make. They could be the same violent, short-sighted species they had always been, but just on a bigger stage. Or they could be better. They could be the kind of people who showed up when someone called for help. Velrin pointed out that humans still built warships. He said the entire fleet was military. Jake nodded and said that was true. He said the galaxy was not as peaceful as the Council liked to pretend. There were raiders and slavers and hostile species out there. Someone had to stand between them and people who could not defend themselves. He said that was what humans did now. They were not conquerors. They were protectors. And there was a big difference between the two. Velrin was quiet and thought about what Jake had said. Then he told Jake something that surprised the commander. He said the Council feared humans. He asked if Jake knew that. Jake said they knew. Velrin continued and said the Council saw human strength and adaptability and capacity for violence, and they worried about what humans might become. They worried that one day, humans might decide to take over. Jake met the ambassador's eyes steadily and said, maybe the Council should pay more attention to what humans actually did instead of what they feared humans might do. He said they had rescued the Kalrathi. They did not ask for payment. They did not demand political concessions. They did not try to leverage this into some kind of advantage. They came because the Kalrathi needed help, and humans were able to give it. He said that was who humans were. The ambassador's skin slowly changed color and shifted back toward its normal shade, which meant he was relaxing and feeling safer. He told Jake he would make sure the Council heard about this. He said maybe it was time someone told them the truth about humanity. Jake smiled slightly and said they would appreciate that. Though honestly, he said humans were fine with people underestimating them. It made life easier when the bad guys thought humans were just another soft target. Velrin almost laughed at that, and it was the first time since the attack that he had felt anything close to amusement. He realized that humans were more complicated than the stories suggested. They were dangerous, yes, but they were also honorable. They could destroy their enemies in minutes, but they chose to disable them instead. They could take whatever they wanted, but they chose to help instead. Lisa finished checking all her patients and came over to where Jake and Velrin were talking. She reported that everyone would be fine. A few broken bones and some burns and lots of fear, but nothing life-threatening. She said the Kalrathi were tough, and they would recover quickly, especially now that they felt safe. Jake thanked her and told Velrin they would have his ship repaired enough to limp to the nearest station within a few hours. If the repairs took too long, they would give the Calrathi transport on one of the human ships instead, whatever they needed. Velrin felt something strange happening inside him. He was starting to trust these Deathworlders. These violent, aggressive humans, who everyone said were dangerous. He was starting to think maybe the galaxy had them all wrong. The Galactic Council chamber was enormous and beautiful, with seats arranged in circles that rose up toward the high ceiling. There was room for representatives from 200 different species, and today every single seat was filled. The chamber buzzed with conversation as aliens from across the galaxy talked to each other in dozens of different languages. All of them had come to hear what Ambassador Velrin had to say about the humans. Velrin stood at the central podium in the middle of the chamber floor. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him from all directions. Some of those eyes were curious, and some were suspicious, and some were afraid. The council had been debating what to do about humanity for years now, and Velrin was about to give them information that might change everything. Councillor Tharn presided over the session from his seat high above the floor. He was a Vorqual, which was one of the oldest species in the galaxy. He had 4 eyes and skin like ancient leather, and he had been on the council longer than Velrin had been alive. Tharn looked down at Velrin with his ancient patient gaze, and said the council was ready to listen. He said Velrin had requested this emergency session to discuss the human intervention, and now was his chance to speak. Velrin activated the holographic display, and images appeared in the air above the podium. The images showed footage from the Gentle Current's external cameras. The entire council watched in silence as the human fleet appeared on screen. They watched as the brief battle unfolded. They watched as the Zethric raiders were systematically disabled in less time than it took most species to even charge their weapons. Velrin began to speak, and his voice was steady and clear. He said the council had spent years debating what he called the human question. They had worried about human aggression and their Deathworld origins and their military buildup. They had placed restrictions on human expansion and monitored their activities and treated them with suspicion and fear. He paused to let his words sink in, and then he continued. He said when his ship carrying 247 Calrathi citizens, including 78 children, was attacked by raiders. It was the humans everyone feared who answered the distress call. Not the council fleet, which was 3 days away. Not the civilized species who claimed to value peace and cooperation. The humans. Councillor Tharn shifted in his seat, and his expression was troubled. He said no one disputed that the humans had helped. But surely Velrin could understand the council's concerns. Human capacity for violence was well documented. Velrin interrupted him, and his voice rose with passion. He said, yes, the humans were capable of violence. They were capable of turning 7 raider ships into scrap metal in minutes. But he asked if the council knew what else humans were capable of. Restraint. They disabled those ships instead of destroying them. They could have killed every pirate aboard. But they did not. They captured them alive for council justice. Another councillor spoke up. Her name was Kelsa, and she was a Treneth. She said the human fleet composition was concerning. 5 warships traveling together, and all heavily armed. It looked aggressive. Velrin countered quickly. He said those 5 warships happened to be on patrol in a region where council patrols were few and far between. He said they were protecting trade routes that the council had deemed too dangerous or too remote to properly defend. He said humans were filling the gaps the council had left behind. He pulled up more images, and these showed the inside of the human medical bay. The council watched as human doctors treated Calrathi patients with gentle care. Velrin pointed to one image that showed Dr. Lisa Bennett sitting on the floor to make herself less frightening to a scared child. He said these were the actions of the dangerous Deathworlders the council feared so much. The chamber erupted with noise as representatives started arguing with each other. Some agreed with Velrin, and some thought he was being naive. Some said humans were still dangerous, and some said maybe the council had been wrong. Councillor Tharn had to call for order several times before the noise died down. Tharn asked Velrin what exactly he was proposing. What did he want the council to do? Velrin took a deep breath and said what he had come here to say. He proposed they stop treating humanity like a threat to be contained and start treating them like the valuable allies they had proven themselves to be. He said they should lift the expansion restrictions and grant humans full council membership with voting rights. He said they should formally recognize the human right to patrol and protect the territories they had claimed. Multiple councilors objected at once. One said it was unprecedented. Humans had been spacefaring for less than a century. Velrin had prepared for this objection. He recited statistics from memory. In less than a century, humans had established peaceful relations with 43 species. They maintained a zero-tolerance policy for piracy and slavery in their territory. They had responded to 67 distress calls from non-human vessels. He said his staff had compiled all the data. 67 times human ships had rendered aid with no expectation of compensation. He asked how many times humans had initiated hostile action against a council species. The answer was 0. Councillor Tharn was quiet for a long moment. His 4 eyes studied Velrin thoughtfully. He said Velrin made compelling arguments. But this was not a decision to be made lightly. The council would need time to deliberate. Velrin spoke quietly, but his words carried across the chamber. He said, while the council deliberated, more ships would be attacked. More lives would be lost because council patrols were stretched too thin and response times were too slow. He said humans were already doing the work of protecting innocent people. All he was asking was that the council acknowledge it and stop treating humans like criminals for helping others. The session continued for hours. Councilors debated and argued and questioned everything Velrin had said. But he could see doubt creeping into their expressions. The absolute certainty that humans were dangerous was cracking and being replaced by something more complicated. Maybe humans were dangerous, but maybe that was not the same as being evil. Maybe the galaxy needed someone who was willing to fight to protect the innocent. When the session finally ended, Velrin left the chamber feeling exhausted but hopeful. A young human was waiting for him outside. His name was Kyle Patterson, and he was part of Earth's diplomatic corps. He had been watching the proceedings from the observation gallery. Kyle approached Velrin and thanked him quietly for speaking up for humanity. Velrin studied the young human and saw past the physical strength and predatory grace that made him look dangerous. He saw intelligence and kindness underneath. Velrin said he had only spoken the truth and nothing more. Then he said he was curious about something. He asked Kyle about what Commander Morrison had said, about humans choosing to be better than what they were. He asked what humanity used to be like. Kyle smiled, but it was a sad smile. He said humans used to be violent and short-sighted. They spent centuries hurting each other before they learned to work together. He said they were not perfect now and not by a long shot. But they tried. Every day, they tried to be better than they were yesterday. Velrin thought about that for a moment, and then he said that might be the most important quality any species could have. Not being perfect, but trying to be better. Kyle nodded and said he hoped the council would see that too. Velrin said he thought maybe they were starting to. 6 months had passed since the rescue of the Gentle Current, and the galaxy had changed in ways both small and large. The Galactic Council, after extensive deliberations and more than a little political maneuvering, had voted to grant humanity full membership status. They formally recognized human territorial claims and acknowledged humanity's role in maintaining peace and security in regions the Council had previously neglected or simply could not reach in time. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the newly established Terran Defense Fleet headquarters on the edge of Council space and looked out at the busy operations center. He had been promoted from commander after the Kalrathi rescue, and with that promotion came more responsibility. The facility was a joint operation now with human personnel, working alongside representatives from a dozen other species. It was strange to see aliens working at stations next to humans. But it was a good kind of strange. It meant things were changing for the better. The headquarters was a symbol of the new era. It proved that Deathworlders could not only coexist with the broader galactic community, but could be valued and trusted members of it. Jake had never imagined this would happen so quickly, but Ambassador Velrin's testimony to the Council had opened doors that had been firmly closed before. Amy Rogers approached him with a datapad in her hand. She had been promoted to lieutenant commander and was now officially his second in command. She told him they had an incoming distress call, and Jake immediately focused his attention. He asked where it was coming from. Amy checked her pad and said it was from a Vorqual science vessel. They were being pursued by unknown hostiles in the Kepler expanse. They were requesting immediate assistance. Jake smiled slightly because the Vorqual had been some of the most resistant to accepting humanity as equals. Counselor Tharn himself was Vorqual, and he had questioned every argument Velrin made. Now they were calling for help from the same humans they had feared. Jake asked how many ships they could deploy. Amy told him the Vengeance and the Defiant and the Thunderstrike were ready for immediate launch. She said estimated time to target was 14 hours. Jake told her to make it 12 hours instead. Then he told her to send a response to the Vorqual vessel. He said to tell them to hold on because the cavalry was coming. Amy grinned as she sent the message. Those 3 words had become something of a signature for the human fleet. Hold on, because cavalry is coming. It meant help was on the way, no matter who you were or where you came from or what species you belonged to. It meant someone cared enough to risk their lives to save yours. As the ships prepared to launch, Jake thought about how much had changed in just 6 months. Humanity had proven itself, not through conquest or domination, but through service and sacrifice. They had shown the galaxy that strength without compassion was just brutality. But compassion, backed by strength, could change everything. The Zethric raiders who attacked the Kalrathi had been prosecuted and imprisoned. Their testimony led to the dismantling of 3 major pirate networks. The trade routes in that entire sector were now safe and protected by regular patrols from the Joint Council and human fleet. Merchants could travel without fear, and families did not have to worry about being attacked. Ambassador Velrin had become one of humanity's strongest advocates on the Council. He pushed for greater cooperation and integration between humans and other species. His testimony had opened eyes and changed minds, and proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply telling the truth about what you had seen and experienced. Dr. Lisa Bennett now ran a medical exchange program that was changing how the galaxy approached healthcare. She taught alien doctors about human medicine while learning about theirs. Dozens of species had benefited from sharing medical knowledge and techniques. Diseases that had been incurable were now treatable. People were living longer, healthier lives because humans had decided to share instead of hoard their knowledge. Kyle Patterson had become the chief human representative to the Council. His youth and optimism and genuine kindness had won over even the most skeptical counselors. He had a gift for seeing the best in people and helping them see the best in themselves. He represented a new generation of humans who had grown up knowing they were part of a larger galactic community. As the Vengeance and its escort ships departed the station, Jake watched the stars slide past the viewport. Humanity had been alone for so long. They spent millennia thinking they were the only intelligent life in an empty universe. Then they discovered they were far from alone. The galaxy was full of life and wonder and danger and opportunity. Humans could have responded with fear when they found out about aliens. They could have tried to conquer, or they could have isolated themselves behind their borders. Instead, they chose a different path. They chose to be the people who answered when someone called for help. The ones who showed up when others ran away. The ones who stood between the innocent and those who would harm them. They had chosen to be heroes, and that choice mattered more than anyone had realized. Amy returned to the bridge and reported that all systems were ready. She said they were clear of the station and ready to jump to faster-than-light speed on his command. Jake looked around at his crew. Some were human, but some were not. There was a Kalrathi at the engineering station, and a Trenith at communications, and even a young Vorqual learning navigation. They all worked together, now as one team, with one purpose. Jake gave the order to prepare for jump. He told all ships to get ready because they had people to save. The 3 warships accelerated forward, and their engines glowed brighter as they prepared to leap across the vast distances of space. These were vessels born from humanity's long history of conflict and war. They were covered in weapons and armor, and they looked dangerous because they were dangerous. But those warships carried doctors and diplomats and engineers and teachers. They carried hope and help, and the promise that no one who called for aid would be ignored. They carried the dreams of a species that had looked into the abyss of their own violent nature and decided to be something better than what they had been. Somewhere in the vastness of space, a Vorqual science crew huddled in the darkness of their damaged ship. They hoped against hope that help would arrive in time. They did not know yet that they had sent their distress call to the most unlikely of saviors. Humans. The Deathworlders. The ones everyone said were too dangerous to trust. But those humans were coming anyway. They were coming because someone needed help, and that was all the reason they needed. They were coming because they had decided their strength was meant for protection, not conquest. They were coming because when someone was in trouble and called out into the darkness, they deserved to know that someone heard them and someone cared. The three ships jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared into the endless black. Behind them, the Joint Operations Center continued its work, coordinating patrols and responding to calls and building something new. A galaxy where Deathworlders and peaceful species worked together. Where strength was used to protect the weak instead of exploit them. The cavalry was coming. They were always coming. And the galaxy was learning that maybe the most dangerous species in the cosmos was also the most compassionate. Maybe the ones who knew violence best were also the ones who understood most deeply why peace was worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, that made all the difference.